think if we can go to the next slide, I'd like to address how we specifically deal with misinformation on our platforms. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay. Mr. Chairman, I mentioned earlier how there are some of our community standards which are actually fairly easy to enforce. The bans on terrorism, child exploitative imagery, these kinds of things, graphic violence in some cases. Then there are topics that are much more difficult, right, and much more highly nuanced and very contextual. And misinformation tends to be, not always, but tends to be more in that second bucket of more difficult types of content to moderate. So because of that, and for various other reasons, we have a three-pronged approach to how we treat misinformation. Number one, we remove the most harmful misinformation that can lead to offline physical violence. Number two, we reduce the distribution of misinformation if it is found to be false by one of our third-party fact checkers, and then we will reduce that misinformation on our platforms so that people are less likely to engage with it. And number three is we seek to inform. If people have engaged with misinformation on our platforms, we want them to be informed that they have indeed done so. We want them to know that they have maybe unintentionally shared misinformation. And we want them to have access to authoritative sources of information. So those are our three-pronged processes, right? Remove the most harmful that can lead to physical violence, reduce other types of misinformation that may not lead to physical violence, and inform our community. I should also mention, and this is obviously very, very important in the context of the election cycle that we're also in. There is another type of misinformation that we will outright remove, and that is misinformation on elections, right? And so if there is misinformation specifically about electoral procedures, about the date the election is going to take place, the way you cast a ballot, those are other types of misinformation that we will outright remove from our platform. What's important to recognize, and I'll go to the next slide here, is how we determine the differences between what we remove, what we reduce, and how we inform, right? So please to the next slide. At Meta, and indeed I think most digital platforms take the same approach, where we want to be very careful about being the arbiters of truth. Right? In many ways, in many aspects, we feel that that's a responsibility that is too great for us to have, and can lead to situations where we're trying to make determinations that we're just not qualified to make about what is true and what is false. And as you might imagine, trying to police misinformation at the scale of more than 3.2 billion people every day would become practically impossible, right? And so what we do is we work with third-party fact checkers in more than 60 languages around the world. These third-party fact checkers are non-governmental organizations that are certified by the International Fact-Checking Network, the IFCN. That is how the fact checkers are chosen, and that's how they are certified. And so what we do is, when we are made aware of a potential piece of misinformation, that piece of content will be enqueued to the third-party fact checkers themselves. In Philippines, we work with 3 third-party fact checkers. We work with Verifiles, Rappler, and AFP. And they are very active fact checkers, I should say. And then we wait for, and while that content is enqueued, then it's up to the third-party fact checker to determine whether that content is indeed false, or there are other cases, right? You can imagine that misinformation isn't just binary. It's not necessarily true or false entirely. There are cases where it can be partially false, it can be misleading, it can be lacking context, right? So there are a number of different ratings that fact checkers can apply on our systems, and those ratings will lead to different actions by Meta's platforms, right? But in a case where a rating is rated false, then that content will be reduced in distribution and will have a label applied to it so that the people who potentially see that content can click on the label and read for truth or for authoritative information from the third-party source, right? And so that's our general approach to how we would treat misinformation when it would not be specifically lead to specific physical violence or lead to to misinformation on the elections process, right? Now, in a case, like I said, where a third-party fact checker not only clarifies that it's false, and we get additional signal that it can lead to violence, or additional signal that this could clearly impact the ability of people to have the access to information they need to properly access the electoral process, then we can outright remove the information. But that is not, I just want to emphasize that the outright removals of misinformation are much more limited in scope. I would also just like to note that, if we see that there are repeated violations, or sorry, I shouldn't say violations, if there are repeated instances of misinformation from the same people, from the same pages, then that can lead to overall less distribution of the content by those people and by those pages. And it can lead to other actions such as demonetization, the prohibition on placing ads, and so forth, right? So there are a number of kind of increasing scale of penalties that can be applied if you're a repeat purveyor of misinformation on our platforms.